The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched high above the assembled delegates, like a cathedral built for gods. Kyle Morrison stood at the human podium, his hands resting calmly on the smooth surface as hundreds of alien eyes watched him from their elevated seats. The air hummed with translation devices, and the subtle sounds of beings from a dozen worlds breathing, clicking or humming in their natural rhythms. Kyle had stood here many times before, always fighting for scraps of respect, always pushing back against rules designed to keep humanity small. Today would be different. Chancellor Drevik sat at the highest seat, his long purple body coiled in the throne of authority. His species, the Vaxians, had ruled the council for 3,000 years. They believed deeply in hierarchy, in the natural order of elder species guiding younger ones. To them, humans were children who had barely left their cradle world. The fact that humans had spread to 40 systems in just 2 centuries meant nothing. The Vaxians had 100 worlds. The Telmorians had more. The Kryn controlled the military. Humans were newcomers, and newcomers knew their place. Resolution 7742 had passed an hour ago. Kyle had argued against it with every logical point he could muster. The resolution stripped humanity of their voting rights in the Economic Forum. It limited human expansion to only 3 sectors that were already mostly claimed by other species. It imposed tariffs on human goods that would make trade nearly impossible. And it did all of this while claiming to be about fair resource distribution and preventing aggressive expansion. The real reason was simpler. Humanity was succeeding too quickly, and the elder species did not like it. The vote had been overwhelming. Only the Nyx had abstained, their ancient representative Elder Cassian watching the proceedings with what might have been sadness in his crystalline eyes. Every other species had voted yes. The Kryn delegates had actually cheered. Kyle had sat through it all, his face a mask of professional calm even as something hardened in his chest. He had requested one final statement before the session closed. Chancellor Drevik had granted it with a dismissive wave, probably expecting Kyle to protest or beg for reconsideration. That was what younger species did when the council made its decisions. Kyle stood and walked to the center speaking platform. The chamber quieted, though not out of respect. It was the quiet of adults waiting for a child to finish their tantrum. Kyle took a breath and spoke in a clear, steady voice that carried through every translator in the room. The words were simple, rehearsed 100 times in his mind during the long debate. The United Terran Coalition hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We will remove all our personnel, assets, and presence from council space within 30 days. We thank you for the opportunities we have had and wish you well in your future endeavors. For 3 full seconds, the chamber was silent. Then the laughter started. It began with a few Kryn delegates, their barking laughs echoing off the high ceiling. Then others joined. The Telmorians clicked their mandibles in their version of amusement. Even some of the smaller species, the ones who usually stayed quiet, made sounds of disbelief. Chancellor Drevik did not laugh, but his mouth parts arranged themselves in what Kyle had learned was a Vaxian smile. Kyle did not argue. He did not explain. He simply nodded once to the chamber, turned and walked toward the exit. His aide, Gregory Shaw, fell into step beside him. Gregory looked like he wanted to say something, but Kyle shook his head slightly. There was nothing more to say here. Behind them, Chancellor Drevik called out in his resonant voice loud enough to carry without translation. The humans would be back within a cycle, he said. They would realize they needed the council more than the council needed them. They always came back. Everyone always came back. Kyle did not turn around. He walked through the massive doors, down the corridor lined with flags from 100 worlds, and into the human diplomatic quarters for the last time. As soon as the door closed behind them, Gregory pulled out his communication device. Kyle, was his question really happening? His voice was steady, but Kyle could hear the weight in it. They had talked about this possibility for months, but talking about it and actually doing it were different things. Kyle looked at his aide and friend and confirmed they were proceeding. Send the signal, he told Gregory. Operation departure begins now. Gregory hesitated only a moment, then pressed the sequence on his device. Across council space on hundreds of stations and dozens of worlds, humans received the same encrypted message. It was time to come home. Captain Lisa Grant was overseeing cargo operations on Station Telmar when her wrist device vibrated with the specific pattern she had been told to watch for. She glanced at the screen, saw the code, and felt her heartbeat quicken. She was a professional, had been a military captain before taking this logistics position, and she did not let her face show anything. She finished signing off on the cargo manifest she had been reviewing, then calmly walked to the Human Quarter Administration office. The next morning, the Telmorian Station Master Vex received a formal notice. All human personnel would be departing Station Telmar within 15 days. Their contracts were being terminated with full compensation. All human-operated facilities would be shut down in an orderly fashion. The message was polite and professional. Vex read it 3 times, not quite believing what he was seeing. Humans did not just leave. They were everywhere on the station. They ran the secondary power grid. They managed half the cargo processing. They operated the medical bay and taught at the technical school. Vex went to find Lisa Grant and ask what was happening. He found her in the cargo bay, directing human workers as they carefully packed equipment into shipping containers. Vex asked what was happening while waving his data pad with the termination notice. Lisa looked at him with calm, professional eyes and explained it was exactly what the notice stated. They were withdrawing from council space. Every human, every ship, every piece of equipment they owned. They would leave the station in good condition, but they would not be staying. Vex demanded to know why. This did not make sense. The humans had good positions and good contracts. Lisa continued directing her workers as she spoke. The council made it clear that humans were not welcome as equal partners, so they were leaving. They did not stay where they were not wanted. Her voice held no anger, no bitterness, just simple fact. Vex tried to argue. He tried to explain that the resolution was just politics, just the council managing resources. Lisa listened politely, then went back to her work. The humans were leaving. The same scene played out across council space. Dr. Nathan Cole packed up his xenobiology lab on Research Station Kepler. His Vaxian colleague Sarix could not understand why Nathan was abandoning years of work on cross-species genetics. They were so close to a breakthrough. Nathan carefully stored his samples and backed up his data. He would continue the work elsewhere, he said quietly, but not here and not anymore. Commander Rachel Wright closed her manufacturing facility that had been supplying ship components to 6 council species. Her Kryn clients demanded to know who would fulfill their contracts. Rachel provided them with a list of alternative suppliers, none of them human. She did not mention that the alternatives could not match her quality or prices. That was no longer her concern. Professor Elena Martinez gave her final lecture at the Vaxian Academy. Her students, many of them Vaxian youth who had never met a human before her class, seemed genuinely distressed. She had taught them about Earth history, about human philosophy, about the strange human concept of hope in the face of impossible odds. One student asked if she would reconsider. Elena smiled sadly and told them she had enjoyed teaching them, but her people had made their decision and she stood with them. She packed her few belongings and left the academy she had called home for 5 years. Day by day, week by week, the exodus continued. Human freighters appeared at human settlements and stations, loading people and cargo with efficient precision. There was no chaos, no panic, no dramatic statements, just quiet, organized departure. Species who had worked alongside humans for years watched in confusion. Some tried to convince their human colleagues to stay. A few offered better terms and better contracts. Every offer was politely declined. The humans were leaving, all of them, and nothing would change their minds. On day 30, Kyle Morrison stood on the bridge of the transport ship Horizon, watching the last human vessel clear the council border. Behind them, council space stretched across thousands of light years, hundreds of worlds, trillions of beings. Ahead lay unclaimed space and the human colonies that had been quietly prepared for this moment. Gregory stood beside him and asked if Kyle thought the council understood yet. Kyle shook his head and said not yet, but they would. He turned away from the view screen and told the crew to take them home. The Horizon turned and jumped to faster than light speed, following the fleet of human ships into the dark. Behind them, the Galactic Council continued its daily business, not yet understanding what they had lost. 3 months passed since the last human ship crossed the border. At first, the Galactic Council barely noticed the absence. The massive bureaucracy continued its work, passing resolutions, managing trade disputes, coordinating defense patrols. Chancellor Drevik had been right about one thing. The galaxy was very large and humans had been only a small part of it. But small parts, when removed from complex machines, can cause unexpected problems. The first cracks appeared in places no one was watching. Communications operator Zell sat at her station in the Outer Rim relay hub, staring at error messages she did not understand. The relay had gone offline 3 days ago. She had followed every troubleshooting protocol in the database, but nothing worked. The system was simply too complex. A blend of 7 different technologies from 5 species all working together. Finally, she found a note in the maintenance logs. Last serviced by Human Technical Team 7 under Gary Sullivan. She searched for Gary Sullivan in the personnel database. Contract terminated, departed council space. No replacement assigned. Zell contacted her supervisor, who contacted the technical division, who contacted the council infrastructure committee. No one knew how to fix it. The relay was a critical link between 12 systems. Without it, ships had to take longer routes. Messages took days instead of hours. Trade slowed. Defense coordination suffered. The infrastructure committee put out a request for bids to repair the relay. The bids came back with shocking numbers and long timelines. What Human Technical Team 7 had maintained as routine work would cost millions and take months to fix. On Station Telmar, Vex discovered a different problem. The environmental systems were working, but barely. Air quality had dropped. Temperature regulation was inconsistent. Some sections were too hot while others were too cold. He pulled up the maintenance records and found the same pattern. Humans had been doing most of the environmental work. They had optimized systems, created custom solutions, kept everything running smoothly. Now those systems were slowly failing, and no one else understood them well enough to maintain them properly. Trade Administrator Quill noticed the economic impacts first. Shipping routes were becoming less efficient. Cargo was arriving late. Warehouses were either overstocked or understocked, never balanced. She ran analysis after analysis trying to understand what had changed. Then she realized the truth. Human logistics coordinators had been managing the complex web of shipping schedules, inventory predictions, and route optimizations. They had made it look easy. Without them, everything was harder, slower, more expensive. The Kryn Military Command discovered they had a serious problem. Fleet readiness had dropped by 30% in just 3 months. Ships were breaking down. Weapon systems were malfunctioning. No one had died yet, but it was only a matter of time. Commander Thex reviewed the supply chain and felt cold dread. Rachel Wright had been supplying critical components, advanced polymers for hull repairs, specialized alloys for weapon systems, compact energy cells that powered everything from personal armor to fighter craft. The alternative suppliers could provide similar products, but they were lower quality and 3 times the price. Thex contacted Rachel Wright directly, sending a message to her last known address. The reply came back 2 days later. Rachel was polite but firm. Her facility now operated in human space, serving human and allied species. She could accept council orders, but prices would be standard commercial rates, not the subsidized rates she had offered when humans were council members. She also required payment in advance and made no guarantees about delivery times. Thex did the calculations. Accepting these terms would consume 40% of his annual budget. Rejecting them meant his fleet would continue to decay. Agricultural planets began reporting food shortages. 17 council species had grown dependent on human crops. Humans had introduced fast-growing, high-yield varieties that flourished in local conditions. Human agricultural specialists had taught optimal planting techniques and pest management. Now those specialists were gone. The crops still grew, but yields were dropping. Some planets faced the possibility of famine within a year. Emergency food shipments were organized, but shipping food across interstellar distances was expensive and complicated, especially with the degraded logistics networks. Financial markets became increasingly volatile. Human financial institutions had provided stability through sophisticated risk management and deep capital reserves. Victoria Chen had personally managed the risk assessment models for the 3 largest council banks. Without her expertise, the banks became cautious, restricting credit and raising interest rates. Businesses struggled to get loans. Investment dried up. Several major trading companies collapsed, unable to adapt to the new financial reality. The Council Economics Committee held emergency sessions but could not agree on solutions. Medical facilities across council space reported declining patient outcomes. Dr. Stephen Clark had been leading research on Telmorian nerve disease. His work had been promising, possibly leading to a cure within 2 years. Now the research sat abandoned. The data archived, but no one able to continue his work. The Telmorians who had volunteered for the study felt betrayed, not understanding that Clark had not chosen to leave them, but had been forced out by council policy. Similar stories played out in a dozen other fields. Human medical researchers had been working on cures, treatments, and improvements that benefited multiple species. All of that work stopped. Human doctors had staffed hospitals and clinics throughout council space. They had a reputation for persistence, for refusing to give up on difficult cases. Other species doctors were competent and professional, but they approached medicine differently. When treatments failed, they accepted it and moved on. Humans tried again, adjusted approaches, researched alternatives. They had something they called bedside manner, a way of treating patients that made them feel cared for beyond just clinical treatment. Patients noticed the difference. Hospitals noticed the difference in their statistics. Cultural venues felt the human absence in unexpected ways. Entertainment districts that had thrived on human music and human art saw attendance drop. Human restaurants closed. Human theaters went dark. Human novels disappeared from bookstores. The galaxy discovered it had developed a taste for human creativity, and that taste was now unsatisfied. Some species tried to fill the void, but it was not the same. Humans had a particular gift for emotional storytelling that crossed species barriers in ways other art did not. At the Vaxian Academy, students petitioned for Professor Elena Martinez to be invited back. Her classes on human philosophy had been the most popular in the school. Students did not just learn facts from her. They learned different ways of thinking about consciousness, ethics, and meaning. The Academy administration contacted Elena. She declined politely. She was teaching at the new Terra University now, educating human students and students from allied species. She was happy in her new position and saw no reason to return. 6 months after the human departure, the Galactic Council held a special session to address what they now called the coordination problem. Representative after representative stood to describe difficulties in their sectors. Systems were failing. Efficiencies were lost. Costs were rising. Quality was declining. Each problem seemed small by itself, but together they painted a disturbing picture. The council had been more dependent on human participation than anyone had realized. Chancellor Drevik tried to downplay the concerns. These were temporary difficulties, he insisted. The council had existed for thousands of years before humans arrived. They would adapt. They would find new solutions. They would train new specialists. It would take time, but they would manage. Most of the council accepted this explanation. They wanted to believe it. A few voices disagreed. Elder Cassian of the Nyx stood and delivered a careful analysis. The humans, he explained, had not just participated in council civilization. They had become deeply integrated into critical systems. Their particular combination of innovation, persistence, and adaptability had filled niches that other species could not easily replicate. The council could eventually adapt, but the transition period would be painful and expensive. Worse, the humans had taken with them not just their labor, but their knowledge and their networks of relationships. The younger species on the council began to express frustration. They had not voted for Resolution 7742. The elder species had pushed it through. Now everyone was suffering the consequences. There were calls for Chancellor Drevik to be censured, for the resolution to be formally repealed, for a diplomatic mission to be sent to the humans. After days of debate, the council voted narrowly to send a delegation. They would offer the humans better terms, more favorable trade agreements, voting rights restored, recognition of human sovereignty. Surely the humans would accept Ambassador Drevik himself would lead the delegation. This would show the humans how seriously the council took the matter. Drevik agreed, confident in his ability to negotiate. He had centuries of diplomatic experience. Humans were young and emotional. They would be pleased by the attention and eager to return to the galactic community. He prepared his negotiating strategy carefully, ready to make generous concessions that would cost the council little, but make them. The council delegation dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the new Terra system, and immediately knew something was wrong with their assumptions. The sensor displays showed activity far beyond what they expected. Massive orbital installations ringed the planet. Shipyards stretched for kilometers, with dozens of vessels in various stages of construction. Defense platforms bristled with weapons that their military analysts identified as highly advanced. This was not the struggling outpost of desperate refugees they had imagined. Chancellor Drevik stared at the displays and felt the first whisper of doubt. His aide Cyrix checked the data 3 times before speaking. Chancellor, the infrastructure here is more extensive than most Council core worlds. The shipyards alone represent construction capacity we estimated would take humans decades to achieve. How did they build all of this? Drevik had no answer. He ordered the ship to proceed to the designated diplomatic approach vector and prepared to meet with human leadership. Ambassador Gregory Shaw met them at the orbital station with full diplomatic protocol. He was polite, professional, and showed no sign of the gratitude Drevik had expected. Gregory escorted the delegation through the station, and everywhere they looked they saw signs of advanced civilization. The technology was sleek and efficient. The people moved with purpose and confidence. This did not look like a society that needed the Council. This looked like a society that was thriving without them. They were taken to a conference facility and given time to settle in. That evening, they were invited to a formal presentation. Director Amanda Price of the Terran Research Institute stood before a large display screen, remote control in hand, smile on her face. She welcomed them graciously and said she would provide an overview of human civilization so they could better understand the context for the negotiations. Drevik settled into his seat, ready to be polite through what he assumed would be a modest presentation of human achievements. Amanda began with a map. The United Terran Coalition now controlled 73 star systems. Not 40 as the Council records showed, but 73. While humans had been members of the Council, they had continued exploring and colonizing in unclaimed space. They had established new worlds, new industries, new populations. The Council had known about some of this, but had vastly underestimated the scale. Amanda showed population figures, industrial output, agricultural capacity. The numbers were staggering. Humanity was not a small, struggling nation. They were a major power. Then Amanda moved to technology. She showed schematics of human ships. Their faster-than-light drives were 15% more efficient than Council standard. Their weapons had longer range and better power management. Their shields could withstand heavier bombardment. Their sensors could detect threats at greater distances. Every system, she explained carefully, had been designed to match Council capabilities for trade purposes while actually exceeding them. Humans had been deliberately downplaying their technological edge. Manufacturing was another revelation. Human factories used advanced automation and artificial intelligence in ways the Council had banned centuries ago as too dangerous. Humans had embraced the technology carefully and safely, creating production capacity that far exceeded their population size. One human worker with proper automation could do the work of 10 workers using Council standard methods. This explained how humans had been able to supply so many goods at such low prices. They were not struggling. They were choosing to subsidize Council species. The presentation continued for 2 hours. Agricultural science, medical technology, computer systems, energy generation. In field after field, humans had advantages they had kept quiet. Amanda explained it matter-of-factly. Humans had joined the Council hoping for genuine partnership. They had shared some innovations but held others back, watching to see if they would be treated fairly. When it became clear the Council viewed them as subordinates rather than equals, humans had begun preparing for independence. Every human working in Council space had been training a human replacement working in human space. Chancellor Drevik felt sick. They had not been managing humans. Humans had been managing them, carefully maintaining the appearance of dependence while building true independence. When Amanda finished her presentation, she thanked the delegation for their attention and left. The Council representatives sat in stunned silence. Finally, Elder Cassian spoke. "I tried to warn you," he said quietly. "You would not listen." The next day they met with Kyle Morrison. He looked older than when Drevik had last seen him in the Council chambers, but his eyes were sharp and his presence commanded respect. Kyle invited them to sit and asked what the Council hoped to achieve with this visit. Drevik launched into his prepared negotiation strategy. He offered restored voting rights, reduced tariffs, recognition of human territorial claims, formal apology for Resolution 7742. He made it sound generous, like the Council was offering humanity a great gift. Kyle listened patiently until Drevik finished. Then he shook his head. "Ambassador Drevik, I appreciate you coming all this way. But humanity is not interested in rejoining the Galactic Council. We have built something better here. A civilization based on mutual respect and genuine cooperation. We have treaties with 17 independent species who left the Council to join us. We are thriving. We have no desire to return to a system that treated us as second-class citizens. Drevik felt panic rising. But surely you need the Council. For trade, for protection, for access to the greater galaxy. Kyle smiled without humor. We have trade agreements with multiple species. Our economy is growing faster than it did in Council space. As for protection, well, I will let Admiral Hayes explain our defensive capabilities. He gestured and a human in military uniform entered the room. Admiral Karen Hayes was a small woman with steel in her eyes. She projected a tactical display that made the Council delegates lean forward in shock. The Terran Defense Fleet consisted of 300 warships of various classes, with 200 more under construction. Every ship was built to standards that exceeded Council military vessels. Hayes walked them through engagement scenarios, showing how human ships would perform against Kryn battlecruisers, Vaxian carriers, Telmorian destroyers. In every simulation, human forces won decisively. The technological advantages Amanda had described translated into overwhelming military superiority. The Council had been living next to a power that could have crushed them at any time. Admiral Hayes let that sink in before continuing. The United Terran Coalition has no desire for conflict with the Council. We prefer peaceful cooperation and mutually beneficial trade. However, I want to be absolutely clear. If threatened, we will defend ourselves and our allies with every means at our disposal. We are not the weak newcomers you believed us to be. She showed them specifications of human weapons systems, deployment strategies, defensive networks. It was a message delivered with professional calm. We can destroy you if you force us to, so please do not force us to. The Council delegates left that meeting shaken. They had come expecting to negotiate from a position of strength. They had discovered they had no strength at all. The final meeting was with President Laura Bennett, the elected leader of the Terran Coalition. She was warm and diplomatic but firm. Humanity bore no ill will toward the Council species. They understood that the failures had been political and institutional, not personal. However, humans would never again subordinate themselves to Council authority. President Bennett offered limited cooperation. Trade agreements on fair commercial terms, not the subsidized rates humans had offered before. Cultural exchanges and scientific collaboration on specific projects, humanitarian assistance when needed, but no political integration, no Council oversight, no surrender of sovereignty. Take it or leave it. The Council delegates knew they had no choice but to take it. They were in no position to demand anything. Before they left, Gregory Shaw gave them one more thing to consider. He showed them a map of the galaxy with current political alignments. The Galactic Council still held the majority of settled space, but its grip was loosening. 17 species had already joined the human-led Federation of Free Worlds. 20 more were considering it. The Federation offered equal partnership, advanced technology sharing, and economic opportunities. It was everything the Council had promised but failed to deliver. Within a decade, Gregory suggested quietly, the Federation might be larger than the Council. The delegation returned to their ship and began the long journey home. No one spoke much. They were each processing what they had learned. The humans had not just left the Council, they had outgrown it. They had been preparing for this for years, quietly building their strength while appearing weak. It had been a masterful strategy, and the Council had fallen for it completely. Chancellor Drevik sat in his quarters and stared at the stars, wondering how he had failed to see the truth. Elder Cassian composed a detailed report. He described everything he had seen and learned. He explained that the humans possessed military power sufficient to threaten the entire Council. He noted that they had no apparent desire to use that power aggressively, but that their patience should not be mistaken for weakness. He recommended that the Council accept human terms, reform its political structure. 1 year after the human exodus, the Galactic Council was collapsing. The problems that had begun as inconveniences had grown into catastrophes. Systems that had seemed stable revealed hidden dependencies that no one had documented. The Council had operated for millennia on accumulated knowledge and established procedures, but humans had become critical to maintaining those procedures. Without them, the machinery of galactic civilization ground slowly to a halt. The quantum communication network linking Council worlds failed completely in 3 sectors. Gary Sullivan had been the only person who truly understood the hybrid system that connected 7 different alien technologies. His documentation existed, but it was dense and technical. Training new technicians to his level would take years. In the meantime, entire regions of Council space experienced communication delays measured in days. Military coordination became nearly impossible. Trade required physical courier ships. Governments struggled to maintain control over distant colonies. Food shortages that had been manageable became famine. 4 Council species faced starvation. Their agricultural systems had been optimized by human specialists who understood both alien biology and advanced farming techniques. Without that expertise, crop yields dropped by 40% or more. Emergency food aid was organized, but getting food to where it was needed required functional logistics networks. Those networks were failing too. Ships arrived late or went to the wrong destinations. Warehouses spoiled food due to improper storage. People began to die. The financial system experienced cascading failures. Victoria Chen had managed risk assessment for 3 major Council banks using sophisticated mathematical models. Without her, the banks made bad decisions based on outdated assumptions. One bank collapsed completely, taking with it the savings of millions. The other 2 restricted lending so severely that businesses could not operate. Credit dried up across multiple sectors. Companies that had been profitable for centuries suddenly could not make payroll. Unemployment soared. Riots broke out on industrial worlds where workers had lost everything. The Kryn military faced existential crisis. Fleet readiness dropped below 50%. Ships broke down faster than they could be repaired. Rachel Wright had supplied components that no other manufacturer could match. The alternatives worked, barely, but failed under stress. In combat exercises, Kryn ships experienced power failures and weapons malfunctions. Commander Thex wrote desperate reports to his superiors. The fleet that had been the pride of the Kryn species was becoming a liability. If war came, they would not be ready. Piracy exploded across the outer regions. Captain Daniel Brooks had coordinated anti-piracy patrols using predictive analytics and strategic ship positioning. His methods had kept merchant shipping safe for years. Without him, pirates operated with impunity. They attacked convoys, raided stations, and disappeared before Council forces could respond. Some human mercenary companies offered protection services, but at commercial rates that reflected the true cost. Council merchants who had grown used to free protection now faced impossible choices. A plague struck the Telmorians. It began in one city and spread rapidly, killing thousands within weeks. The symptoms matched a disease Dr. Claire Baker had been researching. Her notes mentioned a potential vaccine, but the research was incomplete. Telmorian doctors tried to continue her work but could not understand her methodology. The death toll climbed. In desperation, the Telmorian government sent an emergency request to human space. "Please help us," they begged. "We are dying." The response came from Dr. Stephen Clark. He had continued his medical research in human space and had actually completed the vaccine Baker had begun. He offered to provide it, not as a council obligation but as humanitarian aid. The vaccine would be free. Human medical teams would travel to Telmorian space to administer it and teach local doctors. But this was charity from an independent nation, not the duty of a council member. The distinction was important. Humans were helping because they chose to, not because anyone could force them. The vaccine saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Telmorian citizens gathered at spaceports to thank the human doctors who had come to help them. The Telmorian government issued a formal statement of gratitude and immediately opened negotiations to join the Federation of Free Worlds. If the Council would not protect them, and humans would help them despite having no obligation, then the choice was obvious. They wanted to be aligned with humanity. Other species watched and drew similar conclusions. The Nyx had already allied with humanity. Now the Telmorians joined them. The Barathi, a species known for careful deliberation, announced they were withdrawing from the Council. 3 minor species followed. Each departure weakened the Council further. The budget shrank. The bureaucracy struggled to function. Long-standing alliances frayed as species blamed each other for the crisis. Chancellor Drevik tried to hold everything together, but his authority crumbled. The Council chamber became a place of angry accusations. Vaxian representatives blamed the Kryn for pushing Resolution 7742 too hard. Kryn delegates blamed the Telmorians for being weak. Everyone blamed Drevik for losing the humans. There were calls for his resignation. There were threats of species withdrawing. The ancient institution that had governed the galaxy for millennia was tearing itself apart. A formal study was commissioned to understand what had gone wrong. The researchers worked for 3 months, interviewing thousands of beings, analyzing millions of data points. The report was devastating. Humans had represented 12% of council population, but had filled 38% of critical infrastructure roles. They had been disproportionately important in technology, medicine, logistics, finance, defense, and dozens of other fields. The council had functioned not because of its own institutions, but because humans had been holding it together. More importantly, the report identified a cultural factor. Humans possessed what they called determination or grit. When faced with difficult problems, humans did not give up. They tried different approaches. They innovated. They persisted until they found solutions. Other species, having evolved in more stable environments, tended to accept limitations more easily. If something was hard, they worked around it or lived with it. Humans tried to fix it. This difference in mindset had made humans the natural problem solvers of the council. The report made recommendations. The council needed to invest heavily in education and training to replace human expertise. It needed to reform its political structures to prevent the marginalization of any member species. It needed to develop a culture of innovation rather than tradition. All of this would take decades and enormous resources. In the short term, the report concluded, the council needed human cooperation to survive. Without it, the collapse would continue. Chancellor Drevik read the report in his private chambers. He had governed the council for 40 years, had negotiated treaties and resolved disputes, had believed himself a wise and capable leader. Now he understood he had been presiding over an illusion. The council had appeared strong because humans had made it strong. By driving them away, he had revealed the weakness that had always been there. It was the greatest failure of his career, possibly of his entire species' history. He composed his resignation and submitted it to the council. The vote to accept it was unanimous. Elder Cassian was appointed temporary chancellor, chosen because he had been the only one to warn about the consequences of losing humanity. His first act was to send another delegation to human space. This time there would be no negotiations, no demands, no assumptions of superiority. This time they would offer something humans actually wanted, a genuine apology and real reform. The crisis continued to deepen as preparations for the diplomatic mission proceeded. More species announced their departure from the council. Infrastructure continued to fail. The economy continued to contract. People across council space looked to their leaders and saw only failure. They looked to human space and saw success. The Federation of Free Worlds was thriving, growing, attracting new members. It offered what the council had promised but never delivered, genuine partnership among equals. In human space, life continued peacefully. The Terran Coalition expanded its territory, welcomed new allies, built new infrastructure. Human ships explored new systems and made new discoveries. Human scientists pushed the boundaries of knowledge. Human artists created works that moved beings across species lines. They had left the council behind and were building something better. They watched the council crisis with sympathy but without regret. They had offered partnership and been rejected. Now they were proving they did not need the council, but the council desperately needed them. The question was, what would happen next? Would the council survive? Would it reform itself into something worth rejoining? Would humanity accept any reconciliation? Or had the breach become permanent? The answers would determine the future shape of galactic civilization. One thing was certain, though. The age of council dominance was over. The galaxy was changing, and humans were leading that change whether anyone had planned for it or not. 2 years after the Exodus, a council delegation arrived at New Terra. This time there was no grand ceremony, no assumptions of superiority, no confidence that they would get what they wanted. Elder Cassian led the group, chosen specifically because he had warned against Resolution 7742. With him came representatives from every major council species, each chosen for their wisdom rather than their status. They came not to negotiate but to apologize. President Laura Bennett received them in the main diplomatic hall of New Terra. The room was elegant, but not ostentatious, designed to suggest strength without arrogance. Laura stood as they entered, her posture respectful but not submissive. She was the elected leader of a thriving civilization, and she carried herself accordingly. Elder Cassian approached and asked permission to speak. Laura granted it with a simple gesture. Cassian spoke for 20 minutes. He acknowledged every mistake the council had made: the unfair treatment, the political marginalization, the economic exploitation, the fundamental disrespect for humanity contributions. He spoke of Resolution 7742 as the shameful culmination of years of wrong decisions. He spoke of the suffering the council had experienced since the human departure, not to gain sympathy but to acknowledge that the consequences had been severe and deserved. He concluded with a simple statement: "The Galactic Council was wrong. We are sorry. We understand if you cannot forgive us." Laura listened to all of it without interruption. When Cassian finished, she stood silent for a long moment. Then she spoke. "The United Terran Coalition accepts your apology. We recognize that institutional failures are different from personal malice. We harbor no hatred for the Council species or their people. However, acceptance of an apology does not mean returning to the old relationship. That relationship was broken, and we have moved on." Over the following days, negotiations began. Not negotiations about humanity rejoining the Council, but about what kind of relationship might exist going forward. Laura was clear from the start. The Terran Coalition would never again subordinate itself to Council authority. They were a sovereign nation and would remain so. However, they were open to cooperation between equals. The question was what form that cooperation would take. Trade agreements were the easiest part. Human goods and services would be available to Council species, but at fair market rates. The subsidized prices humans had offered as Council members were gone. If Council species wanted human agricultural products, human manufactured goods, human technological innovations, they would pay what those things were actually worth. Several Council representatives complained about the prices until Amanda Price showed them the production costs and profit margins. Humans were not gouging anyone, they were simply charging fairly. Military cooperation was more complex. Admiral Karen Hayes explained that the Terran Defense Fleet would provide security services to allied species, but not to the Council as a whole. Individual species could negotiate defense treaties, but each treaty would be evaluated on its merits. The days of humans providing free protection were over. If Council species wanted human military support, they needed to either join the Federation or pay for security services like any other commercial transaction. Technology sharing would be reciprocal and voluntary. Humans would share innovations with species who shared equally in return. There would be no more one-way transfer of knowledge. Director Price was explicit about this. Humans had given the Council access to numerous technologies during their membership. Those technologies had been used to benefit Council species, while humans received little in return. That pattern would not repeat. Going forward, every exchange would be balanced. Cultural and educational exchanges were welcomed enthusiastically. Professor Elena Martinez had developed exchange programs between human universities and institutions in allied species. She offered to extend similar programs to Council species. Students and scholars could study in each other's territories, learn from each other, build understanding across cultural divides. This was the kind of genuine partnership humans had wanted all along. The negotiations revealed a stark reality. The Federation of Free Worlds had become a major power. It now included the Nyx, the Telmorians, the Barathi, and 24 other species. Together, they controlled territory comparable to the remaining Council. Their economy was growing faster. Their technology was advancing more quickly. Their military, while smaller, was more capable. The balance of power in the galaxy had fundamentally shifted. Some Council species decided to join the Federation, rather than negotiate separate treaties. They had seen what membership offered and wanted to be part of it. The Federation welcomed them, but with clear conditions. Members had to accept the principle of equality. No species was more important than another. All had voting rights. Decisions were made by consensus when possible, and by majority vote when necessary. It was everything the Council had claimed to be but never was. The Council itself had to confront its future. With so many species departed or departing, it could not continue in its old form. Elder Cassian proposed radical reforms. Eliminate the hierarchy between elder and younger species. Grant equal voting rights to all members. Create transparent processes for decision-making. Invest in education and innovation rather than tradition and stability. Some Council species embraced these reforms. Others resisted, clinging to the old ways. The debate continued for months. Meanwhile, the Federation thrived. New Terra became a hub of galactic commerce and culture. Human and alien species worked side by side as genuine partners. The economy boomed. Scientific discoveries accelerated as different species shared knowledge freely. Art and music from dozens of worlds blended into new forms. It was the vision humans had held when they first joined the Galactic Council, finally realized outside of it. Commander Henry Walker taught at the Terran Military Academy, and his classes on strategic planning always included a case study on the Council crisis. He walked students through the human strategy, how humanity had joined the Council with genuine hope, how they had prepared for independence while appearing dependent, how they had made themselves indispensable while building alternatives, how they had left completely when shown disrespect. The lesson was clear. Strength without arrogance, patience with preparation, dignity in departure. Dr. Patricia Long, now head of the Federation Diplomatic Corps, taught different lessons. She emphasized that humans had tried partnership first. They had extended friendship and cooperation. Only when those offers were repeatedly rejected did they withdraw. The galaxy needed to understand that humanity preferred peace, but would not accept exploitation. It was a message delivered to every diplomatic training class, every negotiation, every first contact with new species. Humans were open to partnership, but would not be subordinated. The Galactic Council continued to exist, though much diminished. The species who remained implemented some reforms and rejected others. They rebuilt their infrastructure slowly and expensively. They trained specialists to replace the human expertise they had lost. Some succeeded, others struggled. All of them understood that the galaxy had changed and would never go back to what it had been. Former Chancellor Drevik lived in retirement on the Vaxian homeworld. He spent his days writing memoirs that no one would publish. His legacy was failure, the leader who had driven away the species that held the Council together. Young Vaxian studied his mistakes in school as an example of how arrogance and poor judgment could destroy civilizations. He had believed himself wise and had proven himself foolish. History would not be kind to him. 5 years after the Exodus, Ambassador Gregory Shaw returned to the Council chambers, not as a supplicant but as a Federation representative negotiating mutual defense treaties with reformed Council species. He stood in the same chamber where Kyle Morrison had announced the human departure. The room looked the same, but everything else had changed. The delegates who had laughed at human withdrawal now listened respectfully. The species who had marginalized humanity now sought partnership. Power had shifted and everyone knew it. The treaties were signed with appropriate ceremony. Council species and Federation members agreed to mutual defense, coordinated responses to piracy, shared intelligence on threats. It was not the old hierarchy restored. It was something new, a relationship between independent powers who recognized mutual benefit and cooperation. Humans had taught the galaxy an important lesson. Real partnership required equality. Demanding respect achieved nothing. Earning respect changed everything. The galaxy had learned other lessons too. That innovation mattered more than tradition. That adaptability was a strength, not a weakness. That the youngest species could teach the oldest. That treating people fairly was not just moral, but practical. The Council crisis had been painful and costly, but it had forced growth that might never have happened otherwise. The galaxy emerging from the crisis was more dynamic, more fair, more open to change. Humanity had departed without a word of anger, without threats, without violence. They had simply left quietly and completely. In their absence, the Council had discovered how much it depended on them. Now, as humanity engaged with the galaxy on their own terms, every species understood what they should have understood from the beginning. Humans were not subordinates to,